We are a 2 high school district, and each school has a GSA, a Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and I reached out to their officers. The first time around with Fun Home, I was reluctant to do that. My union said, don't involve the kids, just don't involve the kids. This time I thought, no, I need to involve the kids. These are their books. And the way these people are talking about their books, it was clear to me that the books were just a proxy and that they were really talking about LGBTQ people. So I reached out to the kids who were on fire immediately. I'm Martha, and I'm a high school librarian who was accused of supplying pornography and grooming children because books about LGBTQ people are available in the library. I have been a librarian in this school since I started my career, 2005. I started library school in 2003. The idea of challenges and objections to books is part of our training as librarians. And throughout the last 18 years, from time to time, there have been objections to books. These objections always come from parents, never kids. In the old days, and when I say old, I mean before 2019, when there was an objection about a book, it would usually come from a parent who would raise the concern through either a classroom teacher or an administrator to say, my kid is reading this book, I don't like this, that, the other. Can you get that book out of the library? And then I would be notified, and that would launch this thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called a conversation. The conversation would involve me listening to the nature of the parent's concern. So most often, it has to do with language, kind of language that their kids use in the cafeteria or on the school bus every day, or sexual content, the kind of sex that teenagers have under the bleachers or in the back seat of their parents' car every day. Well, maybe not every day, but regularly. And then I can talk to the parent about, well, what is the literary merit of this book? Why is it in the library? And generally, in fact, always prior to 2019, we could come to an agreement that, you know what? If that book's not a good fit for your child, I totally get it. A lot of books I don't care to read either. I'm not a sci-fi fan or a fantasy fan. I just don't read them. And the same thing is true for your student. If it's not a good fit, put the book back on the shelf. I have 20,000 other choices for you. And if you give me a little direction, I can find a better fit. And that worked great until 2019. And I keep referencing 2019 because in that year, I had my first, well, what am I going to call it? A serious challenge. And that was to the book Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. She's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner and an award-winning graphic artist. Fun Home is the memoir of her upbringing in her family's funeral home, her growing awareness as a tween, teen, young adult of her own sexuality, and her understanding that her father was a closeted gay man. Now, it was made into a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical starring an 11-year-old. In 2019, an administrator told me that there was a parent complaint about Bechdel's book, Fun Home, and it needed to be removed from the library. I said, well, okay, there's a parent complaint, but we don't remove books solely on the basis of a parent complaint. There's a process for that, and we need to follow the challenge process. Long story short, as I continued to protect the book and say, no, you need to follow the process, it became evident that there was no parent complaint. It was the superintendent who wanted the book removed on his say-so. So I tried to explain, well, that's not the way this works because to give you that power and privilege enables you to just walk through the school and remove things on a whim just because you don't like it. And that's not what you get paid to do. And I get paid to make sure you don't. Well, that launched a protracted battle that led to the policy being changed so that he had control of all library acquisitions and removals. And that led to a big kerfuffle. That's when I started becoming an activist in terms of getting the community involved. We actually won that battle. Fun Home is still here. The original policy, which had been viewed as the gold standard in the state of New Jersey, and people were always wanting our reconsideration policy, the original policy was restored. The most recent episode, and please God, let it be my last, but something tells me that it won't be true, started on September 28th, 2021. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I was eating my lunch and reading the New York Times book review when my principal entered my office, which very rarely happens, so I knew this couldn't be good. He told me that he'd heard a rumor, and I've been reflecting on that now lately, wondering if there really was a rumor or if the complaint had come directly to him. I don't know. Anyway, he said there was a rumor that there was going to be a complaint about a book at that evening's board meeting. So board meetings are the last Tuesday of every month. And I said, oh, really? What book? And he said, Genderqueer. I immediately pulled up the reviews for Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe and printed them out for him. I also pulled up our selection criteria, our challenge policy, and the form by which a community member requests to make a challenge to a book, and I handed it all to him. I reminded him that having a fit at a board meeting is not the way we request a challenge to a book, which he knew because he was involved in the 2019 situation, and I sent him on his merry way. I went home that night and I said to my husband, something weird happened at work today. And we fired up the board meeting on live stream. When the public comment started, immediately, I knew I was going to have a problem. A woman gets up and complains about 2 books, Genderqueer, which we'd had on the shelf since 2019. It had 0 circulations. No one had checked it out. And Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison, which I had checked out to a student the day before. And which student did I check it out to? This woman's son. She then started on a tirade about this book. I refused to believe that she had read the book in the 24 hours since I had checked it out to her kid. She complained about the book, and then she complained about me. How dare I check this book out to her 16-year-old? And then she referred to me as a pornographer, a pedophile, and groomer of children. She also referred to the board in the same way, and after her, several other community members got up to speak. This also happened to be during Banned Book Week, a week in September where, for the last 40 years, the American Library Association, librarians, schools, museums, and bookstores around the country celebrate the right to read by acknowledging the fact that certain titles have been challenged over the course of history. As I have done every year for the last 17 years, I had a display up for Banned Books Week. A man got up to rant and rave about the fact that I was promoting banned books, and of course, they must be banned because they're awful. He started listing some of the titles that were on display. Curiously, the titles that he listed and the 2 titles that the previous woman had complained about all had LGBTQ themes. He was also incensed that I had a Banned Book Week contest where I asked the kids to use the library catalog to figure out which of the top 10 banned books of that year we owned in the library. Basically, it was my way of getting them to remember how to use the library catalog. And as a prize drawing, I offered a $10 Dunkin' Donuts gift card. He went ballistic, asking, well, where does this money come from, this $10 gift card? Well, it continued on in that vein. At home, my heart is ba-boom, 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 just leaping out of my chest. And I started experiencing all kinds of crazy physical panic symptoms like, oh, holy crap, what is going on and what's going to happen to old Martha? I'm fortunate to work in a state where I am a member of the teachers' union. So that very night that this happened on September 28th, in real time, as the meeting was going on, I was contacting the president of my union saying, I am going to need some help. Now, the union was my life support here in the building. And then, of course, my family and the broader library community. I reached out to all of my librarian peeps immediately as well, and they were incredibly supportive. I have a wonderful, wonderful library clerk who I work with every day, Pat Stark, and I could not have made it without Pat. She just held me up. I came into school the next day expecting that the man who had stood in my office and said, oh, I heard a rumor, would be trotting right down to see me and talk about what had happened the night before. But no sign of him. And because back then I was a meeker, milder, more considerate person, I thought, well, busy man. Library's not at the top of his priority list. Now I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? I should have demanded a meeting and an immediate investigation of the false charges made against me. But no sign of him that day. The next day, the assistant superintendent showed up in the library and in front of my coworkers and students said, you sure stirred up trouble. How did you pay for that Dunkin' Donuts gift card? I told him, I paid for it out of a $500 honorarium I received when I won the New Jersey Association of School Librarians Intellectual Freedom Award. He said, okay, and he left and hasn't spoken to me since. Day after that, nothing. Didn't hear from anybody. Finally, Friday of that week, when I expressed frustration that I was getting no information about the situation, my direct supervisor said to me, we have no obligation to communicate with you. And then demanded to know how it is that books with language like that could be in a school like ours. And I had to explain to him, well, that's the language kids speak, and students deserve to read books written in their own vernacular. Finally, at about 2 p.m, I happened to encounter the principal in the hallway, and I asked him if there was any update from Tuesday's meeting and if any book challenges had been filed. He said nothing yet, but I expect that we will be talking about books. And I said, well, will there be any action against me? He said, there's nothing planned. Finally, I said, well, how about, on the other hand, will there be a statement of support made for me? And he said, why would we do that? And I said, because I have been an employee in good standing for 17 years, and it would be nice if there were a statement made to assert my integrity, performance, and professionalism. And he said, no, we won't do that. In the days that followed, there were ultimately challenges filed to 5 books in total, all with LGBTQ themes. In addition to Genderqueer and Longboy, challenges were filed to All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson, This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson, and for old time's sake, and for real this time, Fun Home by Alison Bechtel. Unlike 2019, when the superintendent tried to remove the books by fiat, the district attempted to follow its own process, and a reconsideration committee was formed. The committee consists of the principal, the department head, the same assistant principal who demanded to know how the books with language like this could be in a school like ours, an English teacher who's no longer in the classroom, a board member, and a librarian. Now, since I was part of the complaint, my union said you should not serve on the reconsideration committee. It would just call any decision into question. So a county librarian sat on it. The last requirement for the committee is that a community member with expertise in the subject area of the book sit on the committee. Now, as I looked at it, all 5 books had LGBTQ themes. So I recommended to the same supervisor, how could a school like ours, that guy. I recommended that he reach out to our guidance department or perhaps our child study team and see if we could find a practitioner who deals with LGBTQ youth. Well, instead, they choose for their reconsideration committee the president of the school's booster club, a mom who happens to be affiliated with a religious denomination that is anti-LGBTQ. I did not hold out great hope for that committee. In the meantime, while they were working, I was working. Back in 2019, when Fun Home was first challenged, I knew I was going to need community help. I started reaching out to parents who were friendly with the library. I have some parent library groupies who just love the library. So I reached out to those folks. And my brother and sister-in-law happened to be business owners and residents of this district and very active in democratic politics. I tapped into their network. Through my own devices and networking through my family, I was able to assemble a group that we call the North Hunterdon Voorhees. That's the name of our district, intellectual freedom fighters. They helped me get people to the board meeting back in 2019 in the initial Fund Home situation, so I reactivated this group. I said, we got to bring the band back together, because fur is flying over there. We started working very actively to get the word out. We are a 2 high school district, and each school has a GSA, a Gender and Sexuality Alliance, and I reached out to their officers. The first time around with Fun Home, I was reluctant to do that. My union said, don't involve the kids, just don't involve the kids. This time I thought, no, I need to involve the kids. These are their books. And the way these people are talking about their books, it was clear to me that the books were just a proxy and that they were really talking about LGBTQ people. So I reached out to the kids who were on fire immediately. The Reconsideration Committee meeting is a closed meeting, but the monthly Board of Education meeting is open. The board meeting in October was not a meeting of the Reconsideration Committee. In fact, I don't even know if the Reconsideration Committee had met in full by that time, but I know that they had an organization meeting on October 18th. And I don't think they had gotten their act together to fully meet. So this was just a regular meeting of the Board of Education. By the time of that October board meeting, they had to move the location from the board office, which holds about 40 people, to the auditorium here at the high school. There were roughly 400 people in that auditorium. The vast, vast, vast majority were there to stand up for intellectual freedom. Under no circumstances are you going to ban books in this district. That's what most of the people wanted to say. There were about 30 people there who were in support of book banning, who were there to say really horrible things, all in the name of their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, whose name they displayed on placards and waved all around. But by far the most compelling speakers, and if you ever have a chance on a rainy day to go and watch that board meeting, the videos, they're available to watch, were our students. I can't even remember how many kids spoke, and I'm going to say at least 10 students spoke.
Hello, members of the board. My name is Beckett Thomas. I'm a student at Voorhees High School. and I'm here to address the attempted book ban against books such as This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson, Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, and other such books. When I heard that these stories might be banned, I immediately set out to try to find these books in libraries and bookstores, anywhere I could look, so that I could see exactly why they were being banned. And from what I discovered, a lot of these stories have a single aspect in common. Every single one of them has a central idea of homosexuality or LGBTQ ideals. As a bisexual teenager, I've dealt with my fair share of homophobic discrimination. I've been called a number of slurs and derogatory names. I've been excluded and bullied and treated differently, usually to my detriment. I've even lost friends just because I was different. So when I saw that there were parents that were attempting to ban these and other such books, I was heartbroken and I was outraged. High school is a time for self-discovery, not just to find someone's interests in future careers, but also to find their own identity. And North Hunterdon and Voorhees are public schools, meaning that they should be for everyone, regardless of religion, ethnicity, family background, sexual orientation, gender identity, or anything that sets them apart from others. It's bad enough that members of the LGBTQ community are hardly represented in books and movies, but now there are parents that wish to take away what little representation we do have. Let me take the time to remind everyone that banning these books because they talk about and have a centralized focus on LGBTQ ideals, this is way too similar to what happened during World War II. And forgive me if I step a little across the line, but this is something I believe that needs to be said. During World War II, it was a time when Nazi soldiers burnt books, any and all books that didn't agree or did not align with the Nazi and ideals of Adolf Hitler. Are we really at a point where parents are becoming far too similar to the ruthless soldiers of World War II Germany? Let's not forget that in last month's board meeting, out of everyone that spoke in favor of the book ban, not a single one of them was a student. Every single one was a parent. And after reviewing these parents' comments, they claim that these types of books and others are and should be classified as pornography. After reading some of these books and conferring with others who read these books, this applies to none of them. The term pornography is a Greek term which, defined by Merriam-Webster, is any sort of pictures or media depicting erotic behavior intended to cause sexual excitement or arousal. This does not apply to any of these books in question.
The students were unbelievable, so prepared, so professional. They spoke from the heart about their lived experience and what the books meant to them and what the loss of the books would mean to them. It makes me cry even thinking about them. Plus the fact that people holding their Jesus signs were making fun of them. A couple of the kids left the microphone in tears, but it was a very, very compelling evening. And I think the board was quite moved by what they saw and heard. I did not speak at that meeting, nor was I there. And the reason for that was on October 20th, and well, I don't know how blunt I can be. I'm just going to be as blunt as I want to be. From September 29th forward, it was just one shitstorm after another. Every day I walked into the building, I did not know what I was going to face. This environment became so hostile, and there was no relief. The antagonism and the accusatory tone from the administration was constant. Frankly, that relationship is pretty much broken. I mean, we play nice, but I have no trust in these people. There were some teachers who shunned me. A few of those have come back into the fold, but there are some who continue to believe that I am peddling pornography in the library. Some of those relationships are forever broken. Students were involved in this as well. Obviously, the student who was sent here by his parent to check out that book on September 27th was part of it. And there were others who had been coming to the library in weeks prior to this and behaving very strangely. including taking photographs in the library. One of those students spoke at the initial meeting on September 28th to tee up the accusations. That student and his cohorts continued coming to the library thereafter, continuing to behave strangely, and started, in fact, I just found another one today, started turning books backwards on the shelves, targeting books about gender and sexuality, turning them backwards on the shelves or hiding them, so I would find them in these random places. I reported this daily to the administration and asked for help in controlling this behavior. I asked them to monitor this via video, and they continued to rebuff me. I was getting it from all sides. Parents were sending hate mail. Community members were sending hate mail. I am cut from the cloth, so maybe it's my Catholic school upbringing. Keep your nose to the grindstone, do your job, finish your work. So I was in that mode. So the reason why I wasn't at that meeting on October 20th, I experienced a perfect storm of bullshit. There came a time that day where I had what I now understand was a stress-induced breakdown, physical, mental, emotional. I had to be removed from the building. They called my husband to pick me up. I was in tears. I could not stop crying. I could barely speak, and I couldn't catch my breath. My blood pressure was through the roof. My husband took me to my doctor, the same doctor I've been seeing for 25 years, and she did not recognize the creature that sat there before her. As I attempted to tell her the story, her first instinct was, "We need to get you away from the stimulus." She took me out of work for several weeks. She put me on anti-anxiety medication, which I take to this day, Lexapro. She connected me with a therapist. At that point, I was, 61 years old. I had never availed myself to any sort of mental health treatment. I don't know why I waited so long. That therapist gave me tremendous coping skills to help me get through all this. So by the October 26th board meeting, I was still a wreck. October 20th was when I had the breakdown, and my practically lifeless body was dragged out of the building by my husband. The meeting was 6 days later. I didn't come back to school until December 1st. The silver lining of the doctor taking me out of the workplace was that I was at home. Well, what am I going to do? I had nothing else to do except figure out ways to deal with the situation. I could turn the advocacy and networking piece into my full-time job for those few weeks, and that's what I did. In November, no word from the Reconsideration Committee. There was another board meeting, another big turnout, not as big as October, but the ratio was the same. People who opposed book banning dominated the book banners. December, no board meeting. They were taking a Christmas break, I guess. So what we did was we sent Season's Readings greeting cards to every board member, asking them to give students the gift of intellectual freedom. And then I sent my own greeting card saying to every board member, "All I want for Christmas is my reputation." Because they had not uttered a word about the false charges against me, and it was still hanging over my head. As we turned the calendar page into 2022, there was still no word from the Reconsideration Committee until the very last week of January. On a Friday afternoon, I want to say it was the 21st of January, the board published its agenda, as it normally does, before the next Tuesday's board meeting. On that agenda was a link to the Reconsideration Committee's report. No one gave me the announcement, nothing. I just found it there, buried in the agenda for the next Tuesday's board meeting. I fired that thing up and discovered that the committee, to my amazement, actually recommended keeping 4 of the books, but to my chagrin, wanted to ban This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. They wrote 132 words to dispatch it. It's hard to explain their rationale, especially because Well, in the aftermath, we submitted a line-by-line rebuttal. But the committee, which was not unanimous on this point, wanted the book banned because they said it was missing appropriate citations. They had questions about whether it was appropriate, and they didn't like the descriptions and slang that described sex beyond what would be taught in school. By the way, their job was to evaluate the book against the selection criteria for library books as stated in the board policy. None of those elements are part of the selection criteria. And there was a resolution on the Tuesday agenda for the board to vote on banning the book. I sat there on a Friday afternoon and I'm like, no way in hell are they banning this book. It's been in the library since 2015. I have checked that book out so many times to kids. And every time I do, I am stunned because I can't imagine, and maybe it's just because I'm an old lady, but the 14 or 15-year-old that goes to the shelf gets this rainbow-colored book in huge block letters. You can read it across the room. This book is gay. Well, there's no problem with being gay, but when you're 14 and you feel like the eyes of the world are on you, and you're taking this book up to this old bag to check it out, I just consider that a blessing. First of all, I have such admiration for those kids. But then secondly, I consider that a sacred bond between me and the kid. What an act of trust that that kid is coming up and saying, I know I'm safe with this person and that I can ask her to check this book out to me and there's not going to be an issue. I cherish that. And there's no way I'm going to let them destroy that or destroy this book or take it away from kids who need it. So that weekend, right there on the cover of This Book is Gay, in teeny tiny mouse letters, it says, Introduction by David Levithan. And I'm like, Martha, why didn't you notice this before? David Levithan, I know, is a native of New Jersey. I know he works in New York City for Scholastic. I was convinced somebody in my library network must know how to get in touch with David Levithan. So, first thing, Saturday morning, I'm sending out the bat signal to my librarian peeps through our New Jersey Association of School Librarians listserv to say, does anybody have a way to get in touch with David Levithan? Well, one of my friends, Michelle McGreevy, lives in Hoboken, where David lives, and she goes to the same independent bookstore where David shops. She got in touch with the owner of this bookstore, and the owner said that they could put my friend in touch with him. So 2 hours later, I'm emailing back and forth with David, asking if he can send some sort of message to the board. He agrees to do so. He said, I'll write you a message, but please have a student deliver it for me. I arranged for a student to do it. In the meantime, I'm reaching out to other folks to participate in the meeting, which was held virtually, thanks to COVID, so geography was not an obstacle. I was able to reach out to out-of-state alumni. When Tuesday night rolled around, there was a whole roster of us. About 50 people were in queue to try and speak at the board meeting, but because of time constraints, I think only 14 or 15 of us could speak in defense of the book. David Levithan sent a beautiful message, asking that a student read it to the board, and one of the kids volunteered. It told the board about all the feedback he had received from readers as an author, telling him that books helped them understand who they are and that their lives had worth and encouraged them to stay alive. He said that Juno Dawson wrote This Book is Gay for those reasons, to be clear and honest with kids about their lives. David mentioned that he would have wanted Juno Dawson's book when he was a teenager, and that there are tons of kids who need it now. He urged the board to listen to the students who were talking to them. Those are the people the board members are supposed to be serving. I think David's message really affected the board. Not so much because it was from David Levithan. they have no idea what a rock star he is in young adult literature, but because in a really powerful and elegant way, it summarized and called attention to all the student comments the board had heard since October. And that was also a night where I got to speak. Basically, I refuted the Reconsideration Committee's recommendation by telling the board about the numerous times the book had been checked out and quoting some of its rave reviews and noting that one of the top library collection guides listed it as essential, meaning every high school should have it. All of that information could have been available to the Reconsideration Committee, but they never bothered to even check with the library. When it came time for the board to vote during the meeting, I was biting my fingernails at home. And in the end, the board did not accept the recommendation of its own Reconsideration Committee and voted to keep all 5 books. Woohoo! It was great. Oh, it was great. At that point, I broke down again. I just lost it. It's trite to say, but it was a ton of bricks falling off me at that moment. The recommendation that I've been making to everybody to whom I speak, no matter which way the decision goes, if you have to have one of these reconsiderations, if you win, if you lose, there's always opportunity for improvement. So the intellectual freedom fighters, the core group that I work with, the advisory team that I work directly with, we submitted a 17-page report to the board about our observations of the process, what worked well and what could have gone better. Unfortunately, they have taken no action on any of that. In May, I had a conversation with my principal in which he reflected on the events of that school year and told me that I had gone way overboard in supporting the LGBTQ students. Well, when I asked him what way overboard meant, he talked about the fact that there were too many LGBTQ books on the banned books display. Oh, good. I tried to help him understand how and why books become challenged. The very nature of the fact that books on this subject are targeted is how they end up on the display. That is beyond my control. In February of that year, I was contacted by School Library Journal, which is one of my professional publications, and they asked me if I would tell my story. I was on the fence about that for several days. When all this started, I remembered vividly saying to my husband, I do not want to become the poster child for banned books. School Library Journal was asking me to do that very thing. But as I thought about how many of us were going through this and how lonely I felt when I was going through it, I thought, well, if I can write this down and have it be helpful to some other librarian, then I'm willing to do it. And I was so naive. I thought, well, just libraries are going to read it. So I wrote my story, and then it went everywhere. Since that publication in February 2022, I don't think a week has gone by when I haven't talked to somebody about this, whether it's a fellow librarian, a teacher, or a member of the news media. I am talking about this all the time, and I'm happy to do it. Librarians know I'm out there, and they'll call me. Now I'm trying to raise awareness among the general public. Although I didn't want to be the poster child for this, I have become that. But I feel like, if not me, who? One of the reasons I can is that I have tenure. Plus, I'm on the tail end of my career. Someone who's at the beginning of their career, they wouldn't feel free to do it. They have too much to risk. At this point, if they want to fire me, it's going to take them too long. I will be retired anyway. So I feel like I have the ammo to do it. In June, a really great thing. Remember, I told you how critical the kids were and how the Gender and Sexuality Alliances were involved. Well, the New Jersey Library Association awarded our district's Gender and Sexuality Alliances with their Intellectual Freedom Award. one of the proudest nights of my life, let alone my career, was going down to Atlantic City. 3 of the student officers were there with their parents. And when the kids went up there, the entire ballroom was just, well, it was full of librarians, and they leapt to their feet and they cheered these kids. Well, it brings me to tears just thinking about it. It was so beautiful. And then the rest of that night and the next morning, because the kids stayed over, when they walked around the conference, they were treated like honest-to-God rock stars. And people were just mobbing them. And I was so proud. It was just great. The sad thing is, and I'm looking at the picture right now, 3 of the students were at the awards ceremony. 4 were supposed to be there. One of the kids, an out, proud trans student, texted me to say, "I can't make it to Atlantic City today. There's a family emergency." And I was sad that they missed it. I was even sadder come October. They died by their own hand in October 2022. And I often, since that event, I have wondered if there was any way that they could have been in Atlantic City that day, if that affirmation from the crowd, that memory of the affirmation somehow could have kept them going. That has been a huge loss for the school community, and especially for the GSA kids. But you know, according to the principal, I had gone way overboard. Unfortunately, it didn't stop there. Around the same time our student died, 3 of the people who were active in trying to ban the books were running for Board of Education. And our Freedom Fighters organization was very active in trying to get the word out about who to vote for, who not to vote for, and why. But despite our best efforts, one of those people, a Moms for Liberty supporter, now sits on the board. I am fearful about what may come. Just this past weekend, one of the book-banning parents issued a video that included footage from my school library in which he is yet again accusing me of imposing a progressive left-wing agenda on students. That parent, his wife was one of those who ran for the board. Fortunately, she was not elected, but her husband, the video poster, is an ally of the Moms for Liberty board member who was elected, and he's going after me. So it's not going away. The seeds that were sown 2 years ago are still bearing fruit for these people. I feel unsafe here every day, and especially since last weekend when it escalated again with this video. The video I keep referencing showed footage shot in the library in September 2021. At this time, I had a display up about the history of protest movements. I had the peace movement, the civil rights movement. I had a book about Greta Thunberg. I had the farm workers' strike, all different kinds of protest movements. So why did I have that display up? Because the previous summer, we were still in the heat of COVID at that time. Every time I went out of my house, I was seeing on the street corner people protesting vaccines and mask mandates. At our board meetings, there were families coming to protest having to mask their kids to go to school. And who was protesting with those parents? Their own children. I thought, well, this is interesting. And the previous spring, some of our students had marched in protest of the George Floyd murder. So clearly, our kids are interested in this idea of protest. So I put up a display about protest movements. This is what set these people off. This is what is in that video right now. They are, it just boggles my mind, they are protesting a display about protesting. And that's why they're going after me now in this video. You can't make this up. I am getting, by the dozens, crazy people calling me a groomer, thanks to this video that this man has posted. I alerted my union and my principal to that this week. I've let my administration know that I do not feel safe. We're a suburban high school. We have 5 armed police officers in this building every day. For what? Well, they stand around and talk sports. It's very performative. I asked if I could have the presence of a security officer in the library. No, they refused that to me. And I said, all right, can you patrol the building at least? Make a show of acting like a police officer instead of just standing around. And when you patrol the building, can the library be a part of your beat? So I got them to agree that one of our uniformed police officers would enter the library at least once a day to create the illusion of some security. They did a good job of it last spring, and then it sort of fell by the wayside. And then in the wake of posting this video this weekend, they've resurrected that. But that's as close as I can get. The people who are after me are avid and avowed gun owners. In fact, the book banner, who won a seat on the Board of Education, her husband wore to her swearing in a T-shirt. Classic guy. He wore a T-shirt to her swearing in that says, okay, wait a minute, let me just pull this up. Okay, here it is. I am 1,776% sure no one will be taking my guns. He wore this to her swearing in. God. In terms of its direct impact on library books, 2019 is the start date of all of this, but if I was going to be totally honest, this has been building steadily since 2016. I got a huge wake-up call on the first Tuesday of November of 2016. Let me say that again to be clear. The first Tuesday of November of 2016. We are a one-to-one school, so all the kids carry Chromebooks. When school started that year, I would go in to teach and the kids would open up their Chromebooks. About 2/3 of those Chromebooks had bumper stickers on them for a certain presidential candidate. It is hard to stand in front of a class and maintain your composure and teach, especially to teach about information literacy and how to tell good information from bad. It's hard to do. That day, on the first Tuesday in November, I'm walking around the library and I discover swastikas drawn on the library chairs in chalk. I called my administrators. At that time, the man who's now my principal, who told me I had gone way overboard in supporting LGBTQ kids, he was vice principal at the time of the swastika incident. The man who is now the assistant superintendent, who told me I had sure stirred up trouble and wanted to know how I paid for the Dunkin' Donuts gift card, he was the principal at that time. Those two came down to the library, looked at the chairs and said, just wipe it off, and left. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I took pictures of the swastikas and I sent them to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which was at the time collecting examples of hate speech that were coming up around the election. The other sad fact about this is that LGBTQ plus students themselves have told the board directly that through this they are experiencing more harassment, more bullying, more intimidation, more homophobic slurs in the hallway. One of the students, Mitchell, who is a sweetheart, just the loveliest and most expressive and intelligent young man, received death threats because of his support for these books. Our building, by the way, labels itself No Place for Hate, but that's just a glossy veneer that the school puts on and never looks below the surface to examine. What is the day-to-day life of these kids? They're here. So far, no violence in a severe way has erupted between them, but the GSA kids are feeling it. And as we know, one of them is no longer here to tell the tale. My advice for other educators is know your institution's policies and processes. When the principal showed up and said, "I heard a rumor," I knew what the policy was, so I could talk him through that. I keep the policy right here in my drawer. I have multiple copies of it to hand out to whoever needs it. And odds are, if you know these policies and processes back and forth, you might be the only one in your institution who does. Every time this has come up over the last 18 years, because I've dealt with a lot of administrators, it's a revolving door. Their first instinct is always to get rid of the book. I always have to tell them, you can't do that, and here's why. You have a policy. And every one of them has said, "There's a policy about that?" Oh, God. Administrators are more afraid of the parents than they are concerned about the safety of the students or staff. It is easier just to placate the parents than it is to do the hard thing and stand up for students' rights to read. Both times that I engaged with my principal about book complaints, the Fun Home case in 2019 and the 5 books in 2021, he said to me, "Why are we the only library that has these books?" Well, first of all, we are not the only library that has these books. Secondly, you are asking the wrong question. The question should be, why don't other libraries have these books? Every single book is an award winner. Every single book is recommended by the American Library Association and other professional journals. What you ought to be doing is patting me on the back for developing a collection that accurately represents the interests and needs of our students, not questioning my professionalism and judgment. And by the way, when did you get your master's degree in library science to criticize my work in the library? That's my soapbox.